I found the photographs at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Not because I was looking for them. Because our house was on fire. My name is Marcus Chin. I'm 34 years old and I design buildings for a living. Ironic, isn't it? I spend my days creating structures meant to last generations, carefully calculating load-bearing walls, stress points, and foundation depths. But I couldn't see that my own life was built on rotten foundations, ready to collapse at the slightest pressure. The fire started in the kitchen. Electrical fault, the investigators would later say. A frayed wire behind the refrigerator, sparking against the drywall until the flames caught and spread. But that night, as flames ate through the walls of our modern craftsman home in Timber Cove, Oregon, I was just trying to save what mattered. My wife Elena was already outside when I woke to the smoke alarm screaming. I'd stumbled out of bed, choking on the acrid smell of burning insulation and melting plastic. She was on the lawn, wrapped in a blanket, her dark hair wild around her face, lit by the orange glow of our burning home. She was on the phone, and I remember thinking she was probably calling her sister Maria or maybe 911. Later, I would realize she was calling him, warning him, making sure their story was straight before the chaos settled. But I didn't know that yet. I ran back inside one last time. Stupid, reckless, the kind of thing they tell you never to do in those fire safety presentations we sat through in elementary school. But my grandfather's watch was in the bedroom safe, a 1960s Omega Seamaster that had survived his journey from Taiwan to America. And more importantly, the architectural plans for the Chin Brothers flagship project were in there, the one that would make or break our firm, the design that represented 5 years of work and every dollar we could scrape together. The smoke was thick, choking like breathing through wet concrete. Heat pressed against me from all sides. I could hear the crackling of wood, the groaning of support beams beginning to fail. Somewhere above me, something exploded, probably a can of paint thinner in the attic storage. I grabbed the fireproof lockbox from the closet, my hands shaking, my lungs burning. That's when I saw it. In Elena's nightstand drawer, pulled open by my frantic searching or maybe by the fire department's earlier sweep, a burner phone I'd never seen before. Small, cheap, the kind you buy at a gas station with cash when you don't want to be traced. I shouldn't have looked. The flames were spreading faster now, eating through the bedroom door frame. I could hear firefighters shouting outside, telling me to get out, that the structure was compromised. But something in my gut twisted, that instinct that tells you your world is about to change, and I grabbed the phone. Outside, firefighters were arriving in force, 3 engines and an ambulance. The night was alive with flashing lights and radio chatter. Elena rushed toward me as I stumbled onto the lawn, coughing, covered in soot, clutching the lockbox and hiding the phone against my chest. Marcus. Oh my God, I thought you were. Her eyes were wide with what I thought was relief, maybe even love. Her hands reached for my face, checking for burns, for injury. I'm fine, I said, my voice hoarse from the smoke. Everything's fine. But it wasn't. And I didn't know it yet, but in the next 48 hours, I would discover that the fire was the least destructive thing that happened that week. We stayed at the seaside and while insurance adjusters assessed the damage. The fire had consumed most of the house, leaving only the brick facade and some structural supports. Everything else was gone, ash and memory. The inn gave us 2 rooms on the 2nd floor, side by side, overlooking the gray Pacific Ocean. Elena took one, I took the other. She said she needed space to process the trauma, that she kept having nightmares about the flames. I said I understood, that I'd give her whatever she needed. What I really needed was time to look at that phone. The next morning, while Elena met with our insurance agent at a coffee shop downtown, going over policies and replacement values and all the bureaucratic details of disaster, I sat in my hotel room with the small burner phone on the desk in front of me. The morning light came through the window, weak and gray, typical for coastal Oregon in November. Seagulls cried outside. The ocean was restless. The phone was cheap, a prepaid flip phone like something from 2010. No smartphone features, no internet, just calls and texts. The kind of thing you buy when you don't want to be traced, when you're hiding something. My hands shook as I opened it. The battery was nearly dead, down to 15%, but there was enough juice for what I needed to see. Text messages. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All to one number, no name attached, just digits. I started scrolling, my heart hammering in my chest. He's working late again tonight. Come over at 8. Bring wine. I can't keep doing this. It's killing me, but I can't stop. He asked about the money transfers. I covered, but we need to be more careful. I love you. I know this is wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you. When this is over, when we have enough, we can finally be together properly. The words blurred. My throat tightened. My chest felt like someone had placed a concrete block on it. I scrolled faster, desperate for something that would make this make sense, that would prove I was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation. Then I found the photos. Elena and my brother David. In our house, in our living room, her in his lap on the couch I'd picked out at IKEA. In our bed, the sheets I'd washed 100 times tangled around them. In the office we shared at Chin Brothers Architecture, her bent over his desk, his hand in her hair. Timestamps going back 2 years. 2 years of lies, of late nights blamed on clients, of business trips that were never about business. 2 years of Sunday dinners where they sat across from each other making small talk while I talked about projects and dreams, completely oblivious. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I sat perfectly still, the hotel room silent except for the distant crash of waves against the rocks below, as something cold and dark settled into my chest, something I'd never felt before. Not anger exactly. Something colder. More permanent. David. My older brother by 4 years. The person I trusted most in the world after Elena. The man who convinced me to leave my stable job at Morrison & Associates, where I was making $80,000 a year with benefits, to start our own firm. Who stood beside me as best man at my wedding, giving a speech about brotherhood and family that made half the guests cry. Who called me every Sunday just to check in, to see how I was doing, to remind me that family was everything. The Chin Brothers. That's what we called our architecture firm. A family legacy we told clients. Built on trust and shared vision. Built on the bond between brothers who'd grown up in the same house, shared the same dreams, supported each other through everything. I had designed our logo myself, staying up late for weeks to get it perfect. 2 pillars intertwined but standing strong, supporting an arch between them. It was supposed to represent partnership, strength, unity. Looking at those photos, I realized I'd designed my own tomb. The arch was a gallows. The pillars were prison bars. I sat there for 3 hours, going through every message, every photo, every piece of evidence that my life was a lie. The phone battery died at 11%, the screen going black, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the dead glass. In that reflection I saw someone I didn't recognize. Someone hollow. Someone who'd been so focused on building dreams that he hadn't noticed they were nightmares. But beneath the hollowness, something else was growing. Something hard and cold and patient. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I did what architects do best. I studied the structure. I analyzed the weak points. I looked for the load-bearing elements, the parts that held everything together. I created a plan. That afternoon, I told Elena I needed to check on the office, make sure our files were backed up, client projects secure. The fire had reminded me how fragile everything was, I said. How quickly you could lose everything. We needed to make sure the business was protected. She kissed my cheek, her lips soft and familiar, and said she'd order Thai food for when I got back, the spicy noodles I liked from that place on Harbor Street. I love you, she said, her dark eyes steady on mine. I love you too, I replied. And meant it. That was the worst part, the part that made my chest feel like it was caving in. Even knowing what I knew, even with those images burned into my brain, some pathetic part of me still loved her. Still wanted to believe there was an explanation, a misunderstanding, something that would make this not real. But it was real. And that pathetic part of me was going to have to die. Chin Brothers Architecture occupied the 2nd floor of a converted cannery building downtown, overlooking Timber Cove Harbor. David and I had renovated it ourselves 3 years ago, spending nights and weekends tearing out old fish processing equipment, exposing brick and steel beams, installing floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the water. We'd done most of the work with our own hands, saving money, building something together. Every nail I'd hammered felt like a joke now. I used my key to enter after hours, around 6 p.m. when the building was mostly empty. The office was quiet except for the hum of computers on standby and the distant cry of seagulls fighting over scraps at the dock below. I went straight to David's computer. We shared all our passwords, brothers and business partners, remember? Trust was everything. His login was Chin Brothers 2019, the year we'd founded the firm. His email password was Marcus Elena Forever. At the time, I thought it was sweet, a tribute to his favorite people. Now it felt like mockery. His email was easy to access. I started with the obvious, searching Elena's name. What I found was worse than the text messages, worse than the photos. Financial records. Transfers from our business account to a private account I didn't recognize, listed under consulting fees for a company called Cascade Management LLC. Small amounts at first, 500 here, 1,000 there. Then larger. 10,000. 20,000. 50,000. Over 2 years, nearly $200,000 had disappeared from Chin Brothers Architecture. Money that should have been profit, that should have been invested back into the company, that should have been mine. I felt sick. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely control the mouse. But it wasn't just theft. As I dug deeper into his files, clicking through folders marked private and personal and do not open, I found something that made my blood run cold. The Cascade Heights project. Our flagship development, the one that would establish Chin Brothers as a major firm in the Pacific Northwest. Luxury condos overlooking the Pacific, cutting-edge sustainable design, rooftop gardens and solar panels and geothermal heating. A $30 million contract with the Keller Development Group, the biggest deal we'd ever signed. David had been submitting altered plans to the contractor. The emails were all there, carefully documented, showing how he'd swapped approved materials for cheaper alternatives. Structural steel downgraded to a lower grade. Insulation that didn't meet energy codes. Electrical systems that cut corners on safety. Windows that looked right but wouldn't withstand coastal winds. The kind of corner cutting that made buildings collapse. The kind of thing that killed people. He was sabotaging our own project. Our flagship. The one that was supposed to make our reputation. What? Then I found the offshore account statements hidden in a folder labeled Tax Docs 2018. David hadn't just been stealing from the company. He'd been taking kickbacks from the contractors, splitting the difference from the downgraded materials. Every corner cut, every code violation put money in his pocket. And Elena had been helping him hide it. Her signature was on dummy invoices, fake consulting fees paid to shell companies that didn't exist. Her handwriting on memos about material changes. Her name on bank accounts that funneled money to the Caymans. My wife and my brother weren't just having an affair. They were systematically destroying everything I'd built, and they were getting rich doing it. And when Cascade Heights failed, when the cheap materials and cut corners caught up with us, when buildings started having problems or God forbid collapsed, I would be the one holding the bag. Because my name was on the plans too. My license. My reputation. They weren't just betraying me. They were setting me up to take the fall for their crimes. I sat in the dark office for hours, watching the sun set over the harbor, painting the water blood red, then purple, then black. Somewhere in that darkness, the Marcus Chin who believed in honesty and family and working hard and trusting the people you love died. And someone new was born. Someone patient. Someone calculating. Someone who understood that the best revenge isn't hot and fast, isn't screaming confrontations and thrown punches. It's architectural. Carefully designed, structurally sound, built to last. I would take everything from them. Not just the money they'd stolen. Not just their freedom. Everything. Their reputation, their future, their hope. I would dismantle their lives the way they dismantled mine, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but rubble. But they wouldn't know it was happening until it was too late. Until the structure they thought they'd built came crashing down around them. After all, I was an architect. I knew exactly where to place the charges to bring down a building. I knew which supports to remove, which walls to weaken, which foundations to undermine. And I knew how to make it look like an accident. One message stopped me cold, made me read it 3 times to make sure I understood. Once the Cascade project is finished and we have our money, we can finally be together. No more hiding, no more lies. He'll never suspect until it's too late. 2 more months and we're free. David's response, sent at 2:34 a.m. on a Wednesday, 2 more months. Then we disappear and leave him with nothing. Mexico first, then maybe Costa Rica. Somewhere without extradition. 2 months. The Cascade Heights project was scheduled for completion in 8 weeks, final inspection in 10. They were planning to run. Take the money, tank the business, and leave me holding the bag for the code violations and structural failures. I would be ruined. Professionally destroyed. Possibly facing criminal charges if anyone died when their cheap materials failed. At minimum, I'd lose my architectural license, my reputation, everything I'd worked for. They weren't just betraying me. They were destroying my entire future. And they thought they'd get away with it. The old Marcus, the one who died in the fire, would have called the police right then. Would have confronted them, cried, begged for an explanation, tried to understand why. But the old Marcus was dead. And the new Marcus understood something crucial. If I went to the police now, I'd get justice. Maybe. A trial, convictions possibly, if the DA thought the case was strong enough. But I wouldn't get revenge. I wouldn't get satisfaction. I wouldn't make them feel what they'd made me feel. For that, I needed them to think they were winning right up until the moment they lost everything. Rebecca called me 3 weeks later, exactly when she said she would. We need to meet. In person. And you need to see this yourself. We met at her office in Portland, a small suite in a nondescript building near the Pearl District. The office was exactly what I expected. Functional, organized, walls lined with filing cabinets and bookshelves full of tax code references and legal texts. She had transformed her desk into a war room. Documents spread across every surface, color-coded folders, highlighted printouts, sticky notes marking important sections. Your brother is more sophisticated than you thought, she began, gesturing for me to sit. The money trail goes through 6 shell companies, 2 offshore accounts in the Caymans, and a series of real estate investments in Seattle. He's been very careful about covering his tracks. How much? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Total? Just over $400,000. Roughly half from direct company funds, disguised as consulting fees and material purchases. The other half from kickbacks and fraud related to the Cascade Heights project. He's been taking payments from contractors in exchange for approving substandard materials and cutting corners on inspections. My stomach dropped. $400,000. Nearly half our working capital gone. Stolen. Funneled into accounts I didn't even know existed. And your wife? Rebecca continued, her voice gentler now. She's a co-signer on 3 of the accounts. She's been actively involved in creating the shell companies, filing the paperwork, managing the transfers. Legally, she's as culpable as he is. Maybe more because she had direct access to your personal finances and used that access to facilitate the theft. I nodded slowly, my hands clenched in my lap. Can you document all of this in a way that would stand up in court? Already done. She handed me a thick binder, easily 200 pages. Full forensic report with a paper trail that a first-year law student could follow. Bank statements, transfer records, shell company registrations, contractor payments, everything. I've also identified 3 building inspectors who took bribes from your brother to approve work that violates city codes. Good, I said, taking the binder. It was heavy, solid, full of facts and evidence and truth. Rebecca studied me for a moment. Marcus, I have to ask, what are you planning to do with this? The right thing, I said. Eventually. What I didn't tell her was that the right thing had many definitions. And mine involved making sure David and Elena suffered in ways they'd never forget. In ways that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The plan came together over the next 2 weeks, built piece by piece like a complex architectural design. It was elegant in its simplicity, the kind of structure I'd be proud of if it wasn't built on rage and betrayal. Phase 1. I would pretend to discover evidence of financial irregularities. Not the affair, not yet. Just suspicious transactions that I'd bring to David with concern, brother to brother, partner to partner. Phase 2. I would suggest we hire an outside auditor to clear things up before we finalize the Cascade Heights project. Someone independent, someone we could both trust. This would panic David, force him to scramble to cover his tracks, make him desperate and sloppy. Phase 3. While David was distracted, trying to hide evidence and manage the audit, I would secretly contact the Cascade Heights contractors directly. I discovered his plan to use substandard materials. I'd offer to fix things quietly, to personally oversee the structural elements to ensure code compliance. I'd tell them I wanted to protect the firm's reputation without causing problems for my brother. Phase 4. Document everything. Every lie David told, every cover-up attempt, every desperate move to hide his crimes. Build a case so strong that no lawyer, no judge, no jury could possibly find him innocent. Phase 5. Once I had irrefutable proof, once the Cascade Heights project was safely completed to actual code, once David and Elena thought they were home free and ready to run, I would burn their world down. Not just legally, personally, professionally, completely. But I needed one more thing. Leverage. Insurance that if they tried to destroy me first, I could destroy them faster and more thoroughly. That's when I remembered the Redwood Canyon project. Redwood Canyon was supposed to be David's solo commission, a private residence for tech mogul Harrison Webb. $10 million budget, a showcase home carved into the hillside north of Timber Cove, overlooking the Pacific from 200 feet up. Modern design, lots of glass and steel, cantilevered decks, an infinity pool that seemed to float in the air. David had been working on it for 8 months, keeping me out of the loop. He said Webb wanted to work with only one architect, that too many voices would dilute the vision. At the time, I'd been hurt but understanding. David was the senior partner, he had more experience, it made sense. Now I knew why he'd kept me away. It was another fraud scheme, bigger and bolder than Cascade Heights. Harrison Webb was known for paying in cryptocurrency, Bitcoin transfers that were hard to trace, easy to hide from tax authorities. David had been double billing, charging Webb the full $10 million while actually building a $6 million house and pocketing the difference. I'd never seen the plans. David kept them locked in his private office cabinet, a fireproof safe he'd installed himself. But I was an architect. I'd studied engineering. I knew how locks worked. And more importantly, I knew David. He used the same password for everything. Combinations of family birthdays and important dates. His wedding anniversary, our parents' birthdays, the date we founded Chin Brothers. Late one Friday night, I stayed behind after David left. Told him I was working on the Cascade materials list, trying to find budget savings to improve our profit margin. He'd seemed pleased, clapped me on the shoulder with that big brother pride that used to make me feel good. That's the spirit, little brother. We're in this together, remember? Chin Brothers against the world. Always, I'd said, forcing a smile. Once he was gone, I went to work on the cabinet. The lock was a digital keypad, 6 digits. I tried his wedding anniversary first. Nothing. Then our parents' birthdays. Nothing. Then the date we founded Chin Brothers. 071519. The lock clicked open. The Redwood Canyon plans were there, beautifully rendered on expensive paper, David's signature style of clean lines and bold spaces. But underneath them was another set of plans. Same design, same layout, but different materials, different structural supports, cost-cutting measures that would save maybe $2 million but compromise the entire build. Harrison Webb thought he was getting a $10 million architectural masterpiece. David was building him a $6 million house of cards and pocketing the difference. But there was more. Permits signed off by a city inspector I didn't recognize, someone from county planning I'd never worked with. Environmental reports that looked professionally done but had signatures I couldn't verify. Zoning variances that shouldn't have been granted, not for that location, not with that amount of hillside excavation. David hadn't just cut corners. He'd bribed officials. Forged documents. Committed fraud so blatant that if it came out, Chin Brothers Architecture wouldn't just lose clients. We'd face criminal charges. We'd lose our licenses. We'd possibly go to prison. And I'd be guilty by association. My name was on the firm. My license was tied to every project. If David went down, he'd take me with him. I photographed everything. Every page, every document, every piece of evidence that showed David wasn't just a thief and an adulterer. He was a criminal who was about to drag me down with him unless I acted first. This was it. This was the leverage I needed. The insurance policy that would protect me when everything else came crashing down. Now all I had to do was wait for the perfect moment to use it. The moment came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks after I found the Redwood Canyon evidence, Elena suggested we all have dinner together. You and David have barely talked outside of work lately, she said one morning while making coffee in the hotel kitchenette. I think the stress of the fire and rebuilding has created tension between you. Let's do something fun like old times. The three of us, good food, good wine, remember why we love each other. The casual mention of the three of us made my skin crawl. Like we were some happy family unit instead of a love triangle I hadn't known existed. But I agreed, playing the role perfectly. The concerned younger brother who just wanted things to go back to normal, who missed his family, who didn't suspect a thing. We met at Harborview, the nicest restaurant in Timber Cove. White tablecloths, candlelight, views of the marina through floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind of place we'd celebrated closing the Cascade Heights deal, back when I thought we were partners, back when I thought my wife loved me and my brother had my back. Elena wore a blue dress that caught the light, her hair up in a way that showed her neck. I'd bought her that dress for our anniversary 2 years ago. probably around the time she started sleeping with David. David showed up in his expensive suit, the charcoal Armani he'd bought with my stolen money. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man who thought he'd gotten away with everything. "To family," David said, raising his glass of wine once we'd ordered. "We've been through a lot lately, but we're stronger together. Chin brothers, Chin family. Nothing can break that bond." "To family," Elena echoed, her glass touching his, then mine. "To family," I said quietly, watching them over the rim of my glass. The dinner was torture. 2 hours of watching them play their parts, pretending everything was fine. Elena's hand would occasionally brush David's under the table. Quick, subtle, but I saw it. They couldn't help themselves, couldn't resist the small touches, the secret looks. They ordered wine, laughed at jokes, talked about the Cascade Heights project like it was our shared dream instead of their shared crime. David told stories about recent site visits, about demanding clients, about the challenges of managing contractors. Elena talked about her job as an interior designer, about clients who wanted impossible things, about the satisfaction of creating beautiful spaces. They were so good at lying. So practiced at deception. If I hadn't seen the evidence, hadn't read the messages, I would have believed them. Would have thought we were 3 people who cared about each other, building something together. Halfway through the meal, after the entrees arrived, I made my move. "I've been looking at our finances," I said casually, cutting into my steak. "Going through the books, trying to understand our cash flow. Some of the accounting doesn't add up. Consulting fees to companies I don't recognize, material costs on the Cascade Heights project that seem inflated, payments that don't match our contracts." David's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Just for a second, just a fraction of hesitation, but I saw it. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. "I mean, I think we should bring in an auditor," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Just to make sure everything's clean before we finalize Cascade Heights. We're so close to completion, I want to make sure there are no surprises that could damage our reputation." "An auditor?" David's voice was carefully controlled. "That seems excessive, Marcus. And expensive. We're already stretched thin with your house fire and everything." Elena jumped in quickly, her hand reaching across the table toward mine. "Marcus, honey, I know the fire was stressful, but are you sure this is necessary? David's been managing the books for years. He's always been reliable." "I'm not questioning David's reliability," I said, meeting his eyes. "I'm talking about standard business practice. We're about to close the biggest project of our careers. Don't we want independent verification that everything's in order? Isn't that just good business?" I watched the panic flicker across David's face, quickly masked by a smile. "You're right. Of course you're right. Transparency is important." He took a sip of wine, his hand slightly unsteady. "Let's do it. Let's bring in an auditor. I've got nothing to hide." "Great," I said, smiling back at him. "I'll set it up for next week." Elena's smile looked strained now, tight around the edges. "That's wonderful. I'm glad you two are being so professional about everything." "We're brothers," David said, reaching across to clasp my shoulder. "We trust each other. That's what makes Chin brothers work." "Trust," I echoed. "That's everything." That night, after Elena fell asleep in her hotel room, I heard the burner phone buzz from where she'd hidden it in her purse. She'd gotten sloppy, careless, probably because the fire had disrupted her routine. I didn't need to check the phone to know what it said. David would be panicking, texting her frantically, asking what to do, whether I suspected anything, how much danger they were in. Let them panic. Let them scramble. The harder they worked to cover their tracks, the more mistakes they'd make. And every mistake was another piece of evidence, another nail in their coffin. I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not happiness exactly, but purpose, direction. The cold satisfaction of watching a carefully designed plan begin to unfold exactly as intended. The auditor I hired wasn't the independent professional I'd told David about. It was Rebecca Torres, disguised as Stephanie Moore from Northwest Financial Consulting. I'd briefed her thoroughly on the strategy. Find some minor irregularities, nothing criminal, just enough to make David sweat. Then give us a clean bill of health so he'd think he'd gotten away with it, that his cover-up had worked. The real audit, the one that mattered, was happening behind the scenes. Rebecca was building an airtight case with proper documentation, witness statements from contractors who'd taken kickbacks, copies of forged permits, and a money trail so clear that even the worst lawyer in the world couldn't argue his way out of it. Your brother is good, Rebecca told me during one of our secret meetings, this time at a diner in Lincoln City, almost an hour's drive from Timber Cove. He's covered most of his tracks. The shell companies are well constructed, the offshore accounts are properly disguised. If you hadn't given me access to his computer, I might not have found everything. But you did, I said. But I did, she confirmed with a slight smile. He made one crucial mistake. What's that? He trusted your wife to help him. And she kept records. Detailed records. Spreadsheets tracking every transfer, emails discussing the schemes, even a handwritten journal documenting the affair and the financial fraud. She stored everything in a cloud account, thinking it was safe, thinking no one would ever find it. My hands gripped the edge of the table. How did you get access? Rebecca smiled slightly. You'd be surprised what people use as passwords. Her maiden name plus your wedding anniversary. Took me 3 tries. She slid a printed document across the table. This is a copy of her journal. I thought you should see it before we proceed. I didn't want to read it. Didn't want to see her words, her justifications, her lies written out in her own handwriting. But I needed to. Needed to understand exactly who I'd been married to. The journal was devastating. Page after page of entries documenting everything. The first kiss with David, how guilty she felt, how she told herself it was just once, just a mistake. Then the second time, the third, until guilt transformed into something else. Justification. Marcus is a good man, but he's not the man I thought he was marrying. He's too soft, too content with small dreams. David understands ambition. David understands what I need. We took $15,000 from the business account today. Marcus will never notice. He doesn't pay attention to the details, just trusts David to handle everything. Sometimes I wonder if he's willfully blind or just stupid. David says we'll have enough money by spring. Then we can finally stop pretending. We'll go somewhere warm, somewhere far from here. Mexico maybe, or Costa Rica. Somewhere Marcus can't find us. The final entry was dated 2 days before the fire. Once Cascade Heights is finished and we have our money, we can finally stop this charade. I love David. I think I always have, even before the wedding. Marcus will be hurt, but he'll rebuild. He always does. He's like a loyal dog, always coming back no matter how you treat him. Sometimes I feel guilty, but mostly I just feel relieved that this will finally be over. I set the journal down carefully, my hands trembling. Loyal dog, I repeated quietly. I'm sorry, Rebecca said, and she sounded like she meant it. Don't be. I looked up at her, and I could feel how cold my eyes had become. This is exactly what I needed. Now I know there's nothing worth saving. No part of her that deserves mercy. What's your plan? Rebecca asked carefully. Phase 1 is almost complete. The fake audit will come back mostly clean, just minor irregularities. David will think he's covered his tracks successfully. Phase 2 begins next week. And Phase 2 is? I start fixing the Cascade Heights project. Secretly upgrading all the substandard materials David approved. When this is over, that building will be perfect, code compliant, exactly what it should be. I won't let innocent people suffer because of his greed. Rebecca nodded slowly. That's going to cost you personally. Everything costs me personally at this point. What's another 100,000 when I've already lost everything that matters? And after that? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. After that, I burned their world down. The next phase of my plan required precision and secrecy. While David relaxed, thinking the audit had found nothing significant, I began my real work. I contacted the Cascade Heights contractors directly. Not through Chin Brothers Architecture, but through a shell consulting company I'd created, using Rebecca's expertise to make it look legitimate. Pacific Northwest Building Consultants LLC, registered in my name only, funded with my personal money. I met with the site foreman, James Martinez, a weathered man in his 50s who'd been in construction for 30 years. We met at a diner far from Timber Cove, somewhere we wouldn't be recognized. I'm going to be direct with you, James, I said after we'd ordered coffee. I know about the substandard materials. I know my partner approved cheaper steel, inferior insulation, electrical systems that don't meet code. And I know you've been taking kickbacks to use them. His face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And I have documentation proving it. Emails, payment records, everything. I slid a folder across the table. But I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer you a deal. James opened the folder, his hands shaking as he looked at copies of his own emails discussing the fraud with David. What kind of deal? You're going to quietly replace every substandard material with proper, code-compliant alternatives. The structural steel, the insulation, the electrical, everything. I'll pay the difference out of my own pocket, and I'll make sure your company gets a bonus for the extra work. Why would you do that? Because when this building fails, when people get hurt or die because of cut corners, I don't want that on my conscience. And because I need Cascade Heights to be perfect when the truth comes out about what my partner did. James studied me for a long moment. You're setting him up. I'm protecting innocent people and making sure quality work gets done. What happens to my partner after that is just consequences. How much are we talking about for the upgrades? Roughly $120,000. I'll pay in installments as work is completed. But this stays between us. David can never know what we're doing. James was quiet, thinking. Finally he nodded. Okay, but I want immunity. I want written documentation that I cooperated, that I fixed the problems, that I'm not going down with your partner when this explodes. Rebecca Torres will handle that. She's building a complete record of who cooperated and who didn't. Help me fix this and you walk away clean. We shook hands. The first piece of my counter-construction was in place. Over the next 6 weeks, James and his crew quietly replaced every compromised element of Cascade Heights. Better steel shipped in during off hours, proper insulation installed during night shifts, electrical systems upgraded to exceed code requirements. David never noticed. He was too busy covering his tracks from the audit, too distracted by his affair with Elena, too confident that he'd gotten away with everything. I visited the site regularly, inspecting the work, making sure everything was perfect. Every properly installed beam, every code-compliant system was a small victory. I wasn't just saving the building. I was ensuring that when David fell, he'd fall alone. The project would stand as proof of his fraud and my integrity. Meanwhile, I worked on the Redwood Canyon problem. Harrison Webb's $10 million house on the hillside, the project David had kept hidden from me, was the key to everything. I did research on Webb. Self-made tech millionaire, made his fortune in cloud security software, sold his company for $200 million, now semi-retired and building his dream home. He had a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and absolutely intolerant of dishonesty. Perfect. I called his office and asked for a meeting. Said I was David Chen's partner and had concerns about the project that needed to be addressed immediately. His assistant was skeptical. Mr. Webb specifically requested to work with David only. I understand. But I have information about serious problems with the construction plans. Problems that could result in structural failure, legal liability, and significant financial loss for Mr. Webb. I think he'd want to hear this before construction goes much further. There was a pause. Hold please. 2 minutes later she came back. Mr. Webb will see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. at his office in Portland. I spent that night preparing my presentation. Copied all the evidence, organized it clearly, made sure every document was properly labeled and explained. The 2 sets of plans for Redwood Canyon, the real $10 million design versus the $6 million fraud. The forged permits, the bribed inspectors, the offshore accounts where David was hiding the stolen money. This was my insurance policy. My guarantee that when everything went public, I'd have powerful allies and David would have powerful enemies. Harrison Webb's office was in a converted warehouse in Portland's Pearl District. Exposed brick, modern furniture, walls covered with modern art. He met me in a glass-walled conference room with views of the city. Webb was younger than I expected, maybe 45, tall and lean with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. You said there are problems with my house. What problems? I spread the documents across the conference table. Mr. Webb, I need to show you something that's going to make you very angry. My brother and business partner, David Chen, has been defrauding you. His expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. Explain. I walked him through everything. The 2 sets of plans showing him exactly what he paid for versus what he was getting. The inferior materials, the structural shortcuts that would save David millions but compromise the building's integrity. The forged permits that should never have been approved. You agreed to pay $10 million for an architectural masterpiece, I said. David is building you a $6 million house and pocketing $4 million. And when the hillside shifts or the structure fails, You'll be the one dealing with catastrophic repairs or worse. Webb's face had gone cold, emotionless. The kind of cold that comes before violence or lawsuits or complete destruction. Why are you telling me this? Because it's wrong. Because I'm not going to let my brother destroy innocent people to fund his fraud and his affair. And because I'm offering you a solution. What solution? Fire David. Hire me exclusively through my new firm, Chin Architecture. I'll build your house the right way, exactly as originally designed for the agreed-upon price. I'll use my own money to cover what David stole. When this is over, you'll have the house you deserve, and I'll have documentation that I tried to make things right. Webb stared at me for a long moment. This is your brother. He stopped being my brother when he decided to commit fraud and ruin lives. Now he's just a criminal I used to know. You realize what you're doing. When this comes out, your company will be destroyed. Your reputation will be questioned. You'll spend years rebuilding trust. I know. But I'd rather rebuild with integrity than succeed with fraud. Webb stood and walked to the window looking out over Portland. Finally he turned back to me. I accept your offer. But I want one more thing. What's that? I want to be there when you expose him. I want to look him in the eye when he realizes what he's lost. I extended my hand. That can be arranged. We shook. The second major piece was in place. Winter settled over Timber Cove. Gray skies, constant rain, waves crashing against black rocks. Elena and I moved back into our rebuilt house in early December. The insurance had covered most of the reconstruction and contractors had worked quickly. It looked almost identical to the original, same floor plans, same exposed beams, same walls of windows. But it felt different. Hollow. Like a stage set instead of a home. Elena tried to make it feel normal. Cooked dinners, bought new furniture, hung pictures. She talked about hosting Christmas, about inviting David and his girlfriend Rachel over. Rachel was a fiction, of course, a fake girlfriend David had invented to hide the affair. In reality, they were planning their escape. 2 more weeks until Cascade Heights is finished, Elena said one evening while we were eating dinner. Then you and David can finally relax. You've both worked so hard on this project. It's been intense, I agreed, cutting my chicken. But it'll be worth it when we see the finished building. What's next after Cascade? More projects in Timber Cove, or are you thinking about expanding to Portland? Actually, I've been thinking about restructuring the partnership. Maybe taking on different roles, dividing responsibilities more clearly. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? Just that David and I need to have a conversation about the future of Chin Brothers. About whether the partnership is still working for both of us. I watched her process this, watched the calculation behind her eyes. She was wondering if I suspected something, if I was about to discover their plan before they could execute it. I think the partnership is strong, she said carefully. You and David work well together. Why would you want to change that? Just thinking about the future, I said with a smile. Nothing to worry about. But she was worried. That night, I heard her in the bathroom on the burner phone, voice low and urgent. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I was lying in our bed, in the rebuilt house that felt like a mausoleum, listening to her warn David that I might be suspicious. Let them worry. Let them panic. Every worried conversation was more evidence, more documentation of their conspiracy. The final pieces fell into place in early January. Cascade Heights was days from completion, the building standing proud against the Pacific skyline. Every material perfect, every system code compliant, exactly as it should have been from the beginning. My $120,000 well spent. Rebecca had completed her final report. Over 300 pages documenting every crime, every stolen dollar, every bribed official. She'd interviewed contractors, obtained sworn statements, traced money through 6 countries and a dozen shell companies. The case was airtight. Harrison Webb had fired David and hired me to rebuild Redwood Canyon. David had been shocked, angry, demanding explanations. Webb had simply said he'd decided to go in a different direction. David didn't know I was the replacement architect. That revelation was being saved for later. Everything was ready. I scheduled a meeting for a Monday morning in mid-January. Told David it was to finalize the Cascade Heights paperwork and celebrate our success. Told Elena we were having a special lunch to mark the occasion. They both seemed relieved. The finish line was in sight. Soon they'd have their money and they'd be free. I rented a conference room at the Harborview Hotel, The same place where we'd celebrated signing the Cascade Heights contract 2 years earlier. Arrange the space carefully. Documents stacked and organized, laptop connected to a projector, chairs arranged in rows like a courtroom. I invited 12 people. David, Elena, our company lawyer Tom Davidson, Rebecca Torres, Harrison Webb, the district attorney for Lincoln County, 2 police detectives, the editor of the Timber Cove Chronicle, and 3 of our biggest clients for Chin Brothers Architecture. David arrived first, confused by the setup. What is all this? I thought we were having lunch. We need to talk first, I said calmly. Please sit down. Elena came in next, her face going pale when she saw the crowd. Marcus, what's going on? Accountability, I said quietly. I started the presentation. First slide, financial records showing 2 years of theft. $200,000 stolen from Chin Brothers Architecture, funneled through shell companies to offshore accounts in the Caymans. This is a misunderstanding, David said quickly, standing up. We were managing company funds, moving money for tax purposes. Sit down, David, I said firmly. I'm not finished. Next slides, the Cascade Heights fraud. Original plans versus submitted plans, showing every compromised material, every cut corner, every code violation. Emails between David and contractors discussing kickbacks. Bank records showing payments. You approved substandard materials to save money and took kickbacks from contractors, I said, my voice steady. You endangered lives for profit. The clients looked horrified. The district attorney was taking notes. Then I played the audio files. Recordings I'd made of David discussing the fraud with contractors, explicit conversations about bribes and illegal shortcuts. His voice filled the room, damning and undeniable. David was sweating now, his confident mask cracking. Where did you get those? That's a legal recording. It's legal when recorded with the consent of one party in the conversation, Rebecca interjected. Which it was. The contractors cooperated fully. I turned to Elena. Pulled up her cloud account on the projector, displaying her spreadsheets tracking every theft, every transferred dollar. Then her journal, selected entries projected 10 feet tall on the screen. Marcus is like a loyal dog, always coming back no matter how you treat him. David and I will finally be together once we have the money. Marcus will rebuild. He always does. The room was silent except for Elena's quiet crying. I felt nothing watching her cry. No satisfaction, no regret. Just cold purpose. And finally, I said, pulling up the Redwood Canyon documents, the Harrison Webb project. I explained the $10 million fraud, the forged permits, the bribed inspectors. Harrison Webb stood up from his seat in the back. David, he said, his voice like ice, you stole $4 million from me and compromised my family's safety. I will personally ensure you never work in this industry again. David looked around the room, desperate, cornered. Marcus, please. I'm your brother. We can work this out. You stopped being my brother 2 years ago, I said. You became a criminal who happened to share my DNA. The district attorney stood. David Chin, Elena Chin, I'm placing you both under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, bribery, and theft. Detectives. The 2 police officers moved forward with handcuffs. Elena looked at me, mascara streaming down her face. Marcus, please. I made mistakes. We can fix this. No, I said simply. We can't. Because the person you betrayed doesn't exist anymore. You killed him. You destroyed him piece by piece with every lie, every stolen dollar, every night you spent in my brother's bed. The man standing here now is someone you created. Someone who learned that trust is weakness and mercy is foolishness. Live with what you made. They were led out in handcuffs, David screaming about lawyers, Elena sobbing. The conference room emptied slowly, clients shaking my hand, the district attorney promising to be in touch, Rebecca collecting her documents. Harrison Webb was the last to leave. He gripped my shoulder. That took courage. Most people wouldn't have the strength. It wasn't courage, I said. It was necessity. They didn't leave me a choice. Still, the offer stands. Build me something extraordinary. I will. Tom Davidson, our company lawyer, approached. Marcus, we need to discuss the dissolution of Chin Brothers Architecture. I've drafted the paperwork. Chin Architecture, I corrected. New company, sole proprietorship. I'll need you to handle the transfer of legitimate assets and client contracts. Already done. Most clients have agreed to continue with you exclusively. Your handling of this situation impressed them. After everyone left, I stood alone in the conference room. Through the windows I could see Cascade Heights rising against the ocean, perfect and strong. A building that would stand for 100 years, built the right way despite everything. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like the end of something that once mattered. The trial lasted 8 weeks. David was charged with 17 counts of fraud, embezzlement, bribery, and conspiracy. Elena faced 12 counts as an accessory and co-conspirator. Their lawyers tried everything. Claimed I had entrapped them, that I was mentally unstable, that my evidence was fabricated or obtained illegally. The jury didn't believe any of it. Rebecca's documentation was too thorough, the evidence too overwhelming. David was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Elena got 8 years with 3 suspended. They'd be in their 40s when they got out, their careers destroyed, their reputations ruined beyond repair. My parents tried to intervene. My mother called me crying, begging me to show mercy to David. He's your brother. Family forgives. He stopped being my brother when he betrayed me, I told her. And family doesn't betray family in the first place. My father tried a different approach, threatened to cut me off from family gatherings and inheritance. You're destroying this family over money and hurt feelings. I'm holding criminals accountable for their crimes. If you choose them over justice, that's your decision to live with. They chose David. Attended his trial every day, testified as character witnesses, paid for his expensive lawyers. After the verdict, they didn't speak to me again. I was erased from the family, the son who'd betrayed his brother. It should have hurt more than it did. Chin architecture grew slowly but steadily. The story had made regional news, then national. Architect exposes brother's fraud, saves building, read the headlines. Job offers came from firms in Seattle and San Francisco, companies that valued integrity. But I stayed in Timber Cove. Built Harrison Webb's house exactly as designed, a masterpiece carved into the hillside with views that made your breath catch. It was featured in Architectural Digest 6 months later. The house that saved an architect's soul, they called it. More clients came. People who'd heard my story, who valued honesty over convenience. I hired carefully, built a small team I could trust. We took on projects that mattered, buildings that would serve communities, homes that families would love for generations. I moved out of the rebuilt house, couldn't stand living there anymore. Sold it to a young couple with a baby on the way. Let them fill it with better memories. I bought a small modern apartment overlooking the harbor, minimal furniture, clean lines, nothing that reminded me of before. Dating was complicated. Women would recognize my name from the news stories, and I'd see the calculation in their eyes. Some were drawn to the drama, wanted to fix me. Others were scared off by the intensity, the coldness I couldn't quite shake. I went on dates but never seriously. Never let anyone get close enough to hurt me again. Work became my focus. Designing buildings that would outlast pain, creating structures that would stand long after I was gone. There was comfort in permanence, in creating things that mattered. 3 years after the trial, I was at a construction site for a new community center I designed for Timber Cove. Sustainable materials, accessible design, spaces for everyone. My way of giving back to the town that had supported me. My phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Marcus. It was Elena's voice, older, smaller, uncertain. I got your number from the architectural registry. I hope it's okay that I called. I said nothing. I'm out. Early release for good behavior. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I destroyed us, destroyed you. I was selfish and cruel and weak, and I've spent every day of the last 3 years thinking about what I did to you. Still nothing. Can we meet? Talk. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I know I don't deserve that. But I need to say these things to your face. I need you to know how sorry I am. Elena, I said finally, my voice gentle but firm, I forgave you a long time ago. She was quiet. You did. I did. Because holding on to anger would mean you still matter. And you don't. Not anymore. You're a stranger who looks like someone I used to know. A character from a story that ended years ago. Marcus, please? I'm not angry with you. I'm not even sad about what happened anymore. You taught me valuable lessons about trust, about vulnerability, about the importance of protecting yourself. Those lessons made me stronger, made me better at what I do. So thank you, I suppose. And goodbye. Can't we just? No, I said. We can't. You're my past and I'm done building on rotten foundations. I hope you find peace with what you did. But find it somewhere else. I hung up and blocked the number. The construction foreman called my name asking about a design detail. I pocketed my phone and walked toward him, toward the building rising against the Pacific sky, toward the future. 5 years after the fire, Chin Architecture had become one of the most respected firms in the Pacific Northwest. We'd completed 12 major projects, won 2 regional awards, and built a reputation for integrity that was worth more than any amount of stolen money. I still lived alone in my apartment overlooking the harbor. Still worked 70-hour weeks. Still found it hard to trust people completely. Some scars don't heal, they just become part of who you are. But I'd learned to be okay with that. Learned that being broken and rebuilt leaves you stronger in some ways, more careful in others. Learned that you don't have to forgive everyone, that some betrayals are too deep for reconciliation. David was released after serving 11 years. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances. He moved to Phoenix, changed his name, worked in construction management under someone else's license. Never tried to contact me. Smart choice. Elena worked as a retail manager in Seattle. She tried to restart her interior design career, but no one would hire her after the conviction. She sent a letter once through my office, long and rambling and full of regrets. I never read it. Gave it to Tom Davidson to file away in case she tried to sue me for something. My parents eventually reached out, a stiff formal letter inviting me to Thanksgiving. I sent a polite decline. Some bridges once burned should stay that way. But life went on. The buildings I designed stood strong, serving their communities. The clients I worked with trusted me, knew I'd deliver quality work at fair prices. The team I'd built was loyal and talented. I dated occasionally. Even had a few relationships that lasted months rather than weeks. Never let anyone move into my apartment, never shared passwords or bank accounts, never fully let my guard down. Maybe someday I would. Maybe someday I'd meet someone who made me want to risk that vulnerability again. Or maybe I wouldn't. And that was okay too. 10 years after the fire, I stood on a hillside overlooking Timber Cove, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. Below me the town spread out like a living map. I could see the buildings I'd designed. The community center, the renovated library, 3 private homes, a small office building that housed local businesses. Each one perfect. Each one built to last. Each one a monument to doing things right even when it cost you everything. My phone buzzed. A text from Harrison Webb. Just got the new photos of the addition. Absolutely stunning. You're a genius, Marcus. I smiled. The Redwood Canyon house had been expanded twice now, each addition designed by me, each one pushing the boundaries of what was possible with sustainable architecture. Harrison had become not just a client but a friend, one of the few people I trusted completely. Another text, this one from Rebecca Torres. Drinks next week? I have a new case you might find interesting. Rebecca and I had stayed in touch. She'd been hired by 3 clients I'd recommended, had built her practice into something impressive. Sometimes we'd meet for coffee or dinner, trading stories about fraud cases and difficult clients, 2 people who understood the necessity of documentation and truth. My team was small but mighty. 5 architects, 3 drafters, 2 project managers. We turned down more work than we accepted, only taking projects that met our standards. Quality over quantity, integrity over profit. Chin Architecture had become exactly what I'd envisioned when I started it. Not the biggest firm, not the most famous, but respected. Known for excellence and honesty in an industry where both were rare. The sun sank below the horizon, turning the ocean dark. Stars began to emerge in the clear January sky. I'd been standing there for almost an hour, thinking about the decade that had passed since that terrible night when the fire revealed truths I'd been too blind to see. They tried to destroy me. My brother, my wife, the 2 people I'd trusted most. They'd stolen my money, betrayed my love, plotted to frame me for their crimes and leave me with nothing. Instead, they'd freed me. Freed me from blind trust, from naive faith in family bonds, from the weakness of believing loyalty was always returned. I'd learned to stand alone, to build on solid foundations, to trust carefully and document everything. I'd learned that integrity sometimes costs everything, but that the alternative costs more. The betrayal had cut deep, deeper than any wound I'd experienced in combat or in business. But it hadn't broken me. It had rebuilt me into someone stronger, someone harder, someone who understood that survival sometimes means becoming someone new. I wasn't the Marcus Chin who'd woken up to his burning house 10 years ago. That man was dead, burned away in the flames along with his naive trust and blind faith in family. I was someone else now. Someone who designed buildings that would outlast lies. Someone who built on truth instead of hope. Someone who understood that the best revenge isn't hot and fast, isn't violence or confrontation. The best revenge is standing. Still standing when your enemies have fallen, when their schemes have collapsed, when their lives have crumbled into ruins they built themselves. I turned from the overlook and walked back to my truck. Tomorrow I had 3 client meetings, a site inspection, and a consultation for a new hospital wing. Work to do, buildings to design, structures to create that would serve their communities for generations. They tried to destroy me. Instead, they'd made me exactly what I needed to be. Someone who built things meant to last. If you've ever been betrayed by those you trusted most, know this: you have the power to rebuild. Not with revenge born of rage, but with the cold precision of someone who refuses to be destroyed. The choice to rise, to stand, to build something better from the ashes, that choice is always yours. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't in watching your enemies fall. It's in still standing when they're gone, creating something that matters, living a life built on truth instead of lies. The foundations you build after betrayal are always stronger than the ones you built before. Because now you know exactly how much weight they need to bear. Like and subscribe to this channel.